Rome is not yet a city of marble emperors and eternal glory. This is the 3rd century BC, and Rome is scared. Very scared. What is about to shake Rome will not come with armies, banners, or siege towers. It will come quietly, carried by faith, fear, and a promise of salvation. In 216 BC, at the Battle of Cannae, Rome suffers one of the worst defeats in its history. Hannibal does not just beat the Roman army, he annihilates it. Nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers are dead. Entire families lose fathers, sons, heirs. The countryside is littered with bodies wearing Roman armor. And for the first time in generations, a terrifying thought spreads through the city. What if Rome can actually lose? The streets fill with rumors. What if Hannibal marches on the city tomorrow? What if the gods have abandoned us? What if Rome's destiny has run out? For a society built on discipline and public order, fear is the enemy that spreads fastest. And this is where Rome does something it almost never does. It looks outside itself. Roman religion is normally practical, almost contractual. You give the gods sacrifices. They give you victory, harvests, protection. No ecstasy. No trance. No loss of control. But now, desperation pushes the Senate toward an ancient prophecy preserved in the Cybele books, Rome's sacred emergency manual. The message is blunt. Rome will be saved when it accepts the Great Mother of the gods. The Great Mother is not Roman. She does not come from Latium, Greece, or Etruria. She comes from Asia Minor. Her name is Cybele, known to her followers as Magna Mater, the Great Mother. To the Senate, this is not devotion. It is strategy. If foreign gods helped other civilizations, perhaps a foreign goddess can save Rome. So in 204 BC, the Senate makes a decision that will change the city forever. They send an official delegation east. Not for soldiers. Not for grain. But for a stone. A black, irregular object, believed to have fallen from the sky, a sacred stone, treated as the physical embodiment of the goddess herself. When it arrives in Italy, the city holds its breath. Rome believes this is salvation, a divine reinforcement imported in the middle of a losing war. But what Rome does not understand yet is this. You can invite a goddess into your city. You cannot choose what comes with her. Because Cybele does not arrive alone. She brings a cult unlike anything Rome has ever seen. A form of worship that does not rely on calm ritual and civic restraint. It relies on rhythm, on bodies, on surrender. And soon, the streets of Rome will hear sounds that do not belong to a republic built on discipline. Flutes, bells, and voices raised not in measured prayer, but in frenzy. Rome thinks it has brought in a weapon to defeat Hannibal. It has no idea it has opened the gates to something far more dangerous. Because the enemy about to shake Rome will not be an army. The ship carrying Cybele does not arrive in Rome quietly. It comes upriver, through Ostia, carried toward the heart of the city along the Tiber, the same river that feeds Rome's trade, its grain supply, its lifeline. This is not just a journey. It is a public moment. Word spreads quickly. Crowds gather along the banks. Senators, priests, citizens, everyone wants to witness the instant when salvation reaches the city. According to Roman tradition, this is not just a delivery. It is a divine test. Ancient authors tell us that something goes wrong. The ship stalls. The oars strain. The ropes pull tight. And the vessel does not move. For a city already haunted by defeat, this feels ominous. Has Rome misunderstood the prophecy? Has the goddess rejected them? And then comes a story Romans will repeat for centuries. A woman steps forward from the crowd. Her name, according to later writers, is Claudia Quinta. She is not a priestess, not a magistrate, not a figure of perfect Roman reputation. In fact, rumors surround her, whispers of impropriety, of a woman accused of not fitting Rome's ideal of controlled female virtue. Claudia speaks a simple challenge to the goddess. If I am innocent, move the ship. She takes hold of the rope. And the ship moves. To a modern ear, this sounds like legend, and it is important to say that clearly. This scene comes from literary tradition, not eyewitness record. But legends matter, especially in moments of fear. Because for Rome, this story does two things at once. It declares that Cybele accepts Rome, and it turns a public scandal into a public cleansing, as if the goddess herself can overturn suspicion. The Senate takes this as confirmation. The black stone is carried into the city with ceremony. It is placed on the Palatine Hill, the most politically charged ground in Rome. The hill of kings, of power, of origin myths. Later, a permanent temple will rise there, and in 191 BC, that temple will be formally dedicated. Formally, everything looks controlled. Official. Roman. The goddess is absorbed into the state religion. Her festivals are placed on the calendar. Her worship is supervised. From the Senate's perspective, the situation seems manageable. Cybele has a temple, a place, a role. But religion is not just temples and calendars. Religion is people. And soon, Rome sees the people who truly belong to the Great Mother. They are not Roman priests in calm white togas. They do not speak with measured authority. They do not move with civic dignity. They are called the Galli. And when they appear in the streets of Rome, order begins to crack. These priests look wrong to Roman eyes. Their hair is long and loose. Their faces are painted. Their clothing is bright and foreign. Bells hang from their bodies. Tambourines and flutes replace sacrificial knives. Their voices are sharp, high, and relentless. Their movements are ecstatic, spinning, leaping, shaking. This is not Roman religion. Roman worship is restrained. Public but controlled. What the Galli bring is something else entirely. Noise. Motion. And a rhythm that seems to take over the body. Imagine the scene. The Forum, where senators argue policy and merchants debate prices. Soldiers drilling nearby. Citizens moving through daily routines. And then the sound arrives first. Not marching feet. Not a military trumpet. A pulsing beat. A piercing flute. A chorus that doesn't ask for permission. The procession follows. Priests who, to Roman observers, seem to blur the boundaries Rome guarded most fiercely. Who dance instead of walk. Who shout instead of speak. To many Romans, this is not just strange. It is dangerous. Because Rome is built on self-control, of the body, of the household, of the state. And here is a cult that openly celebrates losing it. Rome invited Cybele for the war. It has no idea it will have to live with her after it. And what comes next will force Rome to draw a line, not between citizen and foreigner, or god and mortal, but between order and something far more unsettling. Because the Galli are only the beginning. To understand why the Galli terrified Rome, you need to understand what it meant to be a Roman man. Roman identity was built on pillars Rome treated as sacred. Self-control, family lineage, and public honor. A man was expected to rule his household, leave legitimate heirs, serve the state, and discipline his own body as carefully as he disciplined others. Even Roman religion followed this logic. Worship was public, regulated, unemotional. The gods were partners in a contract, not forces that seized the body and erased the self. The Galli broke every one of these rules at once. They rejected Roman dress. They rejected Roman restraint. And worst of all, they seemed to reject the future Rome depended on, lineage. Roman writers describe them as neither fully male nor fully female by Roman standards, and that ambiguity made lawmakers deeply uneasy. But appearance alone was not the true fear. The true fear was contagion. Because the cult of Cybele was not passive. It did not ask people to observe quietly. It demanded participation, emotional, physical, public. When the Galli processed through the city, they did not stay inside temples. They moved through streets, markets, and forums. Their music echoed through residential neighborhoods. Their rituals interrupted daily life. And Rome began to notice something disturbing. People stopped merely watching. Some followed the processions. Some swayed to the rhythm. Some felt themselves pulled in, unsettled by emotions they had been taught to suppress. For a society obsessed with discipline, this was a nightmare. The Senate understood crowds. It understood riots. It understood political unrest. But this was different. This was ecstasy, a public state where a person no longer governed themselves. Roman writers called it furor, madness, a loss of reason, a surrender of the self. And at the center of that fear was a myth Rome could not ignore. Cybele's beloved was a young man named Attis. According to the story, Attis went mad beneath a pine tree, mutilated himself, and died. From his blood, flowers grew, a sign of rebirth and absolute devotion to the goddess. To Roman ears, the myth was already unsettling. Because in Rome, the body was not only personal, it was political. The disciplined body produced heirs. Heirs produced citizens. Citizens produced Rome. And now Rome faced a cult that spoke a different language, where pain could be sacred, and surrender could be devotion. This is the point where Rome's patience begins to end. Not because Rome fears death, but because Rome fears what happens when belief teaches citizens to step outside the identity the state depends on. And that fear will explode each spring into a public crisis Rome cannot fully control. A ritual so infamous that Romans gave it a name that sounded like a warning. The Day of Blood. Important context before we continue. The events you've heard so far begin in the 3rd and early 2nd century BC, when Cybele is introduced during Rome's war crisis. But the cult's most intense, highly structured festival cycle becomes far more visible and developed in later centuries, especially under the late Republic and the Empire. Time passes. Rome changes. And the Great Mother's rites become something bigger than anyone in 204 BC could have imagined. One day in that later cycle gains a reputation that never fades. Dies Sanguinis. The Day of Blood. Content note: what follows is in. It takes place in spring, toward the end of March, the same season when fields are sown and armies prepare to march. But for the cult of Cybele and Attis, rebirth does not come gently. It comes through pain. On paper, it belongs to the public religious calendar. In reality, everyone in Rome understands. When this day arrives, the city does not feel like it belongs to its usual masters. Not to magistrates. Not to soldiers. Not even to the Senate. It belongs to the Great Mother. The signs begin early. Shops close their shutters. Traffic slows. Families keep children indoors. And then the sound returns, not like a military march, but like a pulse that refuses to stop. A pounding beat. A sharp flute. Bells that make the street feel haunted. The processions emerge from temple precincts and narrow streets. Dozens of Galli move together, faces painted, hair loose, bodies already sweating. They dance with a violence that looks like exhaustion and devotion at once, striking instruments harder and harder, as if trying to drown out thought itself. Ancient writers describe the moment when the ritual crosses its threshold. First comes movement, then shouting, then trance, and then the boundary Rome cannot tolerate. The priests wound themselves as an offering. Not hidden. Not private. Public. Blood is treated as sacred, gathered for altars, marked on holy objects, used as a sign of devotion to the Great Mother. To her followers, this is the point. Blood is life. Blood feeds the earth. Blood restores balance to a wounded world. But to Roman observers, this crosses every line. In the arena, violence has rules. Here there are none. Only bodies, sound, and a crowd pulled into the spectacle. Roman sources hint, sometimes directly, sometimes through uneasy silence, that hostile observers believed these rites could go even further in moments of total frenzy. Whether every detail is literal or shaped by outrage is difficult to prove. But the fear is real, and fear itself becomes part of the story. As the processions move through the city, entire districts grind to a halt. Streets clog. Commerce stops. Normal Rome disappears for hours. Some people watch in silence. Some turn away. Some tremble, unsure whether refusing to watch might anger the goddess. And then comes the cruel turn. The next day is called Ilaria, a day of joy, laughter, celebration, the return of Attis. Rome is expected to smile, as if the previous day never happened. But for many Romans, it doesn't leave. The rhythm stays in the head. The images return in sleep. The city feels changed. And one more detail makes the whole thing colder. In late antique calendars, the Day of Blood is even fixed to a date, March 24th. A ritual so feared it becomes official. That is why the Senate becomes desperate. Because if religion can suspend routine, law, and reason, what else can it undo? In the next part, Rome will fight back, not with armies, but with laws, fear, and compromise. And it will discover that once belief takes root, even power has limits. Rome does not respond to chaos with prayer. It responds with law. After enough public festivals, enough disruption, enough dread, the Senate understands something crucial. They cannot remove the goddess. Driving her out would mean admitting the prophecy was wrong, and worse, that Rome had offended a power it barely understands. In a city ruled by omens, that risk is unacceptable. So Rome chooses compromise. Cybele may stay, but her cult will be controlled. The first target is obvious. The Galli. A decree is issued: Roman citizens are forbidden from becoming priests of Cybele. No Roman-born man is allowed to undergo the irreversible initiation. No Roman family is allowed to lose a son to the goddess. Only foreigners, slaves, or non-citizens may serve her in that way. On paper, this solves the problem. Roman bodies are protected. Roman bloodlines remain intact. The cult is pushed to the margins. But religion does not obey paperwork. The festivals continue. The music continues. The processions still cut through the city. And now something even more dangerous happens. The cult becomes both official and forbidden at the same time. The Senate endorses Cybele as a state deity. It keeps her temple on the Palatine. It keeps her on the calendar. And yet it fears, even despises, the excess that makes her worship what it is. This contradiction poisons everything. Because what is tolerated but feared becomes powerful. Rumors circulate. Stories grow darker. Some are exaggeration. Some are propaganda. But fear spreads faster than accuracy. People whisper that the goddess punishes those who mock her. That sickness follows disrespect. That misfortune follows neglect. Whether these stories are true matters less than the fact that people believe them. And belief is something the Senate cannot legislate away. Even more unsettling, Rome begins to borrow from the very cult it condemns. Phrygian flutes, once associated with foreign madness, appear in theaters. Drums once feared for their power over crowds are used to stir emotion in public performances. Poets invoke Cybele as a symbol of unstoppable force. The cult seeps into Roman culture through the back door. The state fears it. Artists exploit it. The people feel it. For a time, the system holds. The goddess is honored. The priests are restricted. The rituals are tolerated and watched. Until history shifts again. And Rome discovers that Cybele is no longer its only religious problem. Now jump forward, far forward. Not years. Centuries. By the 4th century AD, Rome is no longer the city that invited Cybele in fear of Hannibal. It is vast, exhausted, and changing. Old certainties weaken, and a new religion rises. One that speaks not in frenzy, but in salvation, discipline, and moral clarity. Christianity does not merely compete with older cults. It condemns them. Christian writers describe the rites of Cybele with hostility. Her priests are portrayed as corrupted and unnatural. Her festivals are held up as examples of what the new faith rejects: bodily obsession, chaos, uncontrolled emotion. The old language of fear returns, but now it comes from the other side. Imperial policy begins to follow theology. Public rituals of older cults are restricted, then discouraged, then pushed out of public life. Temples fall into neglect. Processions vanish from the streets. The sounds that once haunted Rome, the flutes, the bells, the pounding rhythms, begin to fade. But belief does not die instantly. Some devotees persist longer than officials would like, quietly, privately, away from public eyes. Not a spectacle now. A risk. Eventually, enforcement tightens. The gatherings end. The cult fades. Cybele, once powerful enough to make Rome tremble, becomes memory. And here lies the cruel irony of the Great Mother. For centuries, her priests gave up everything. Their bodies, their families, their future. They believed their sacrifice was eternal. But the cult did not survive. The temple on the Palatine crumbled. The black stone lost its worshippers. The festivals vanished from the calendar. Nearby, Christian churches rose. No knives. No public frenzy. Only hymns and prayer. For many Romans, it felt like waking from a nightmare. And yet, imagine a Roman night, late in the 4th century. The city celebrates Easter. Candles burn. Voices sing. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint rhythm echoes, slow, careful, barely audible. Not a parade now. A memory refusing to die. The next morning, the room is empty. History moves on. But the lesson remains. Because the cult of Cybele forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the ancient world, and about religion itself. Faith can build empires. Faith can demand sacrifice. And faith can turn the human body into an altar. When we imagine Rome, we think of marble, law, and order. But beneath that image lies something far darker. A city that once invited a goddess out of fear, and spent centuries trying to contain what she brought with her. Not armies, not weapons, but the terrifying power of belief, once it escapes control. To understand why the cult of Cybele terrified Rome so deeply, we need to strip away the scandal, and look at what was really at stake. Because this story was never just about a foreign goddess. It was about control. Rome was not afraid of violence. It was not afraid of death. It was not even afraid of foreign gods. Rome was afraid of losing itself. Every Roman institution, the army, the family, the senate, the law, was built on a single principle. The individual must be governed. By discipline. By duty. By lineage. By restraint. Cybele's cult attacked that principle at its core. It told people to surrender their bodies instead of mastering them. It turned pain into devotion. It replaced order with rhythm, law with trance, identity with ecstasy. And worst of all, it did this in public. The Senate could punish crimes. It could suppress rebellions. It could defeat enemies. But it could not arrest a rhythm once it entered the body. That is why Rome's response was always conflicted. They restricted the priesthood, but kept the goddess. They feared the rituals, but allowed the festivals. They tried to fence her in, while watching her influence leak into the culture. Because Cybele exposed the truth Rome did not want to face. Power does not belong only to laws and armies. It also belongs to belief. And belief becomes dangerous when it bypasses reason. That is why Christianity eventually succeeded where the Senate failed. Not because it was gentler, but because it offered a different kind of control. Salvation without public frenzy. Order without blood. Discipline without drums. Cybele's cult did not vanish simply because Romans were offended. It vanished because it no longer fit the kind of order the late empire chose to enforce. And yet, her shadow never fully left. Every time a society fears mass emotion. Every time leaders worry about crowds losing themselves. Every time belief threatens to outrun authority. The same question returns. How much control does a state truly have over faith? Rome invited the Great Mother in a moment of fear, and spent centuries learning that some forces, once welcomed, can never be fully contained. Not gods. Not crowds. Not belief itself. That is the real legacy of Cybele. Not a forgotten cult, but a warning, carved into the history of the most disciplined empire the world has ever known.